Hey everyone at track 2 here. If you could either take your seats or move your conversation, that'd be great. This is Ben Combee, here to talk about some beautiful, amazing PCB conference badges, and maybe not PCB, I don't know. Thanks very much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out here. I know I'm competing with lunch, so I'll try to keep it to 20 minutes. Yeah, I'm Ben Combee. If you search online for Unwired Ben, you'll find me. So let's get started. So I'm going to talk a bit about kind of the variety of conference badges I've encountered since I started getting into the whole making and electronics world. It's going to be a bit of a personal story, but I wanted to kind of highlight a few things that have changed over time. Things like what kind of processor is on these boards, what does it use to make the lights blinky, what lights is it blinking? Is it blinking LEDs, an LCD display, OLED, e-paper, other things? What kind of communications does it have? Does it, have a radio on it? Does it talk to other badges? What's it do that's interesting? Then talking about expansion, the big one here that's kind of taken off in the last 5-6 years is the simple add-on or shitty add-on, depending on your point of view, standard. And then finally, there's kind of a functionality versus hackability. If you go to the big thing in the desert, the other big thing in the desert, DEF CON, people kind of evolved a whole separate culture there around like badges being puzzles, being things you do, whereas the world here of the crowd supply teardowns, the SuperCons, Open Source Hardware Summit have been more about taking it and building your own functionality on top of it. But let's get started. First badge I'm going to show is from 1999. This is kind of before the age of easily manufactured electronics. And this is actually the first hacker conference I ever went to, which was in Nashville. And the organizers, I guess, had found in surplus a bunch of old unpopulated modem boards, and so thought it would be really fun to go silkscreen on top of it and pass those out as the VIP badges. I think this might be one of the oldest electronic PCB badges out there. No active electronics. I don't think we even had the ability to turn them back into modems, but that was really fun. The first one that I really encountered myself was back in 2010, which was at the Next Hope in New York City. Now, I live in Austin, Texas now, and I lived in Austin, Texas for a long time, but for a few years I was in New York, and I'd gotten into making and electronics. I became a member of NYC Resistor, and of course going to the big hacker conference was one of the things. This board was made by Travis Goodspeed, legendary hacker, and it was kind of a way of him popularizing his GoodFET software that he built around this MSP 430. And like, okay, you have this board, and now you can go use it to tag into the JTAG on devices, do your reverse engineering. And I can't even find mine. This is actually a picture I borrowed from Laughing Squid, because I'm fairly sure I destroyed the pads on it trying to solder some things onto it. So I never really got mine functioning, but it was an inspiration. So moved back to Austin, and kind of the next thing I encountered was in 2013 when I was at South by Southwest, the big tech and music film conference. And they were doing a thing for several years tied in the maker movement called South by Southwest Create. And it's kind of more of a trade show, more of like, vendors, sponsors like you see out there showing their stuff. SparkFun had these really fun Arduino-based boards called the Badger Stick, and they were giving them out, and you could go there. You could, you had to kind of build them by soldering a few things on, or maybe they were pre-built even. They had a cardboard card that you could stick them onto, so you could wear them on a lanyard around your neck. But this is kind of typical of like what kind of early maker scene things look like. It had a display panel made of individual LEDs, and you could have your name scroll by it. It's fun. There wasn't really any sort of like badge hacking thing going on there. They were kind of mainly getting people into making rather than people showing off. So I'm a father of 3. That kind of started about that time. So I had a few years of a break from electronics, but I got back into it in 2019, and I attended SuperCon. And what was really interesting this year, they already had some really neat badges. This one was based around a Lattice ECP5 FPGA. And so it was not just introduction to FPGA for people that were there. It was also an introduction to RISC-V, because they had done a soft core on that. And they'd done a 2D graphics engine and an HDMI output. And one of the things I really want to highlight here is the PC board there. What SuperCon does, which is really amazing, is they don't just give you a badge. Usually they give you some sort of attachment that you can do your hardware hacking on, and has an easy way to connect in. And so people took this, built all sorts of stuff on there, and of course, then we're reconfiguring the FPGA to do things. And it was an amazing experience. I ended up actually doing a demo on top of the RISC-V core, and I won the graphics competition by default because no one else entered that category, but it was still really, really fun. One of the other things, this was kind of a high time in the making scene when people were giving out lots of stuff at these events, and so Adafruit gave out these edge badges just in the swag bag along with that. And so I played with that and built my own name tag. This was my first introduction to CircuitPython. So this is using one of the Nordic semiconductor chips, and it was very easy. You'd plug a USB cable into it, and you'd have a USB drive, and you could just go and edit directly the Python files. And one thing I really love about this one is because it was integrated with the CircuitPython system, and there were like continually new builds of it being done on their CI servers, this kind of became something that could keep working on and doing things on. And I ended up using it a few years later as a basis of this Def Punk word clock hack that I did, which showed up on Hackaday, and most people were commenting about the quality of the 3D printing. So go commenters. Next year, Open Source Hardware Summit. I'd been to some of the early ones when I was in New York. I was really excited. And then something happened in March that made everything shut down. You all remember COVID. So what's fascinating about this is that several of the big makers in the community came together, built this really interesting smartwatch design, and then they were all warehoused in something at NYU, like an office at NYU, for 9 months after that because everything was shut down. They couldn't get access to them. So finally, 9 months after the event, they were able to get access. They were able to send them out to the people that had signed up as attendees. And I immediately ooh, this is neat, and then I bricked it. When I was preparing for this talk a few months ago, I found it in my drawer, and it's like, can I still get this working? And I was able to go online, chat with some people, find resources, and get a new version of CircuitPython loaded on this, at least to the point where I could have it error out on the display. Which, amazing part of the open source world, and I'll talk more about some efforts around this at the end of the talk. Pandemic's still happening. Remoticon 2 is really interesting. So SuperCon was shut down during the pandemic, and they switched over to an all-remote format. With the second year for this, they came in with a design and published it on the Hackaday.io website. And what this was a kind of a KiCad project. Basically, it's like, here, we've given you this project that is this kind of basic layout along with our own graphic design elements. Now you can go take it, modify it, get it fabbed however you want to, and you have your own personalized badge for this remote event. And people actually ran with it and did some really neat things and showed them off during the event online. And I just, again, love the open source nature of this. And this kind of was like, bring your own processor, bring your own everything. About the same time, earlier I'd shown the Adafruit one. That's kind of a category of what I call commercial badges. Like, these are ones you can just go to your local maker supply and buy and use for any event. I picked up their e-ink one from Pimeroni out of the UK. This one's based on the new Raspberry Pi 2040 processor at the time, e-ink display. This one was based on MicroPython instead of CircuitPython, so interacting with it was a bit different. But I ended up taking this to the next SuperCon and having as kind of my name tag badge to go along with the other badge you're about to see. But no real communications on it. They later did a version of it that was based on the 2040, or the Pico W that had Wi-Fi. So this one actually just has a raw 2040 chip on it. The wireless one is using a module on the back. They just used the Pico W soldered on instead of doing all their own sourcing of the wireless supplies. And then they did a version of this for the GitHub Universe conference, which was using the 2350. And I got one of those, but it arrived in the mail with a broken e-ink screen because they didn't know how to package it. Now, if you were here at Teardown last year, Nathan Jones did a really great talk talking all about this Voya 4 badge. The thing I was showing off here is what happened after the conference. It's a 4-bit computer implemented on top of a PIC microcontroller, amazing control panel. I brought it home, and my 4-year-old at the time picked it up and immediately and started playing with the demos that had been written on there. So, these badges aren't just for the life of the conference, but they're things you can take with you and keep an experiment on. And find ways to delight people with. We get to 2023. This is one of my favorite ones ever, the Vector Scope badge. This is again using a Raspberry Pi 2040, just on a Pico module soldered to the back. But what they did is they built a whole environment around it. It's just not just, you'd program Pico, but they provided MicroPython and they provided analog inputs, and they were having people pretend it's an oscilloscope that you can feed signals into to put things on the display. And so people did that. They came up with really interesting hacks just kind of based upon that one. Then they had hacks where they were based upon modifying MicroPython, and hacks where they were reprogramming the whole thing. And again, provided the prototyping area for you to build things, and it kind of slid into those pins on the side if you got it all soldered up. This also is one of the ones that features the SAO connector, and you're going to find a lot more SAOs when we go to next year. This was last November, the SAO badge. This is one of millions of possible configurations of it, because everyone that came to the conference was customizing it with their own things. So SAO is a simple or shitty add-on standard. It's basically a way for you to plug your own Blinky board into a conference badge. And they decided to go all the way with it and making this board that had 6 SAO connectors on it and not really any real display of its own. Now they provided you a bunch of SAOs, like the, which ones have you, SuperCons have you attended board they have there. But then they gave people enough warning time that, I'd say half the attendees there came with their own to, and because of the way you build PC boards, people don't just make one, they make 5 or 10 or 15 or 20. So there was so much trading, so much people swapping out different electronic method, fabrication methods, all this stuff that I thought it was an amazing amount of creativity. The SAO I made is right in the middle there, the video player one, which actually was based on the hack that I did for the Vector Scope badge the previous year. Final one I want to highlight is from this spring. This just happened in Edinburgh last month, the Open Hardware Summit, and kind of taking it in a whole different direction, a whole different kind of innovation. That's fabric. That is something that was sewed, was embroidered with conductive threads. And then they provide you a whole kit with a microcontroller, with more conductive thread, with a needle. I heard from one of the other attendees here, he was there, and the first day of the, people were just listening to the talks and sewing in the audience, and it was kind of amazing. And so you can build this whole customized badge without even needing to pull out a soldering iron, learning new techniques, learning just new ways to do things. And yeah, I'm constantly inspired by what all the conferences are doing. So kind of looking where we are in the future, this year, there's kind of a trend going on today where people are saying some political stuff, but as part of doing research for this, I collected lots of information from my archives, started pulling information from lots of sources, and I've launched a new website, badgehacking.org, which might not be live yet, but it will be over the course of the weekend. But I've started this as a wiki on GitHub, which is collecting information about every badge that I can find out there, links to videos about them, the GitHub repos for them, other things people have done on them. And also, we're archiving the GitHub repos of those badges if they exist. So we have one place you can go to find information and find links to the original creators. And just, have a big resource for us all to rely on as we come up with new ideas for what's going to happen in the future. And find, uses for the hardware that we've collected from the places we visited. So I'm really excited about this project. If you want to help contribute photos, links, documentation, get a hold of me, and we'll make it great. So thank you all for attending. Let's go get some lunch.